What's up everybody, and welcome back to another video. Today I want to talk about the new reading that was released on StarWars.com about the new Thrawn Alliance's book. The new reading is about Padme. Also in the article they released a new alternative cover with Padme on it. They also included an audio recording of the reading done by the legend Mark Thompson. Now I would like to read that passage to you guys and then go over everything after. Now, let's begin. Duja's ship. Padme had never known its real name, but the correct ID beacon listed it as a possibility, was small and cramped, and to the casual observer completely harmless. But the casual observer would be wrong. The ship was boosted, extra shielding, twin laser cannons in the front and one in the rear, and a pair of top-grade proton torpedoes. More a pocket fighter than a simple transport, it had evaded Batu's pitiful police force with ease. It should, she thought, dully from the inside of the cockpit escape pod, make for a spectacular crash. She still didn't know how that vulture droid had gotten her. She arrowed straight into Molkivja as soon as she hit the system, then crossed the wide expanses of plain scrubland and lake at the lowest altitude she dared. Combined with the possibilities concept size that should have let her ship past anything patrolling the area around Duja's coordinates, clearly it hadn't worked. The vulture had nailed her, and she'd never seen it coming. Apparently, the Batu's police pursuit had damaged her ship more than she realized. She barely had time to kick it high enough to give the escape pod time to deploy before the whole thing began to come apart. And now, as she burned at the controlled fall towards the hills below, she watched the multiple pieces of the possibility arcing their fiery way toward the distant landscape. Like Duja herself, the ship had faced its final challenge and lost. Now it was up to Padme to avenge them both, though that was starting to look increasingly unlikely. The fragments of the possibility were still blazing and smoking their way through the air, and already she could see a handful of vulture droids starting to gather over the horizon ahead. So far, they didn't seem to have spotted her pod amid the rest of the debris. But the minute her repulsor lift came on, they would probably spot the unnatural shift in trajectory. Even if they didn't, the terrain below hardly offered much hope for escape. The hillside was covered in jagged rocks, grass, and wide bushes, with no decent cover for several kilometers around her. There was a glint of sunlight from the river meandering its way down slope. She could see the bushes rippling in the breeze coming over the hill. She caught her breath. The river! It would be risky, but right now it was the only shot she had. Taking a last look at the distant vulture droids, she settled her hands on the controls and got to work. The pod had the standard range of steering capabilities that would offer the passenger a choice of landing sites. But like the repulsor lifts, using the thrusters ran the risk of drowning the vulture's attention. Fortunately, the river was nearly below her, and it took only a small and brief nudge on the controls to bring her onto the proper vector. She watched the river rushing toward her, trying to judge the exact trade-off point where the risk of droid detection and the chances of breaking her back with the impact were both at their lowest. 50 meters, 40, 30, 10. Bracing herself, she hit the repulsor lift control. The deceleration she programmed in was more intense than she expected. Slamming her hand into her seat with an abrupt multiple G-force. Even so, The pod hit the river with an impressive splash, and she watched the water level run up the viewpoint as the pod submerged. She shut down the repulsor lifts and huffed out a relieved sigh. She wasn't prepared for the repulsor lifts to suddenly reactivate themselves. She grabbed the controls again, forcing a manual shutdown, but it wasn't enough. Even without them, the pod had enough buoyancy to start a slow drift back toward the surface. Probably a deliberate safety design, and under most circumstances she would have welcomed it. Here though, a bobbing escape pod would probably guaranteed her capture. She ran her eyes over the panel, looking for inspiration, trying to find some trick of airfoil or ballast that would let her circumvent the safeties and take her back down again. But the pod's designers clearly hadn't anticipated this particular situation, which left only one chance. Clenching her teeth, watching the level of water on the viewpoint, she keyed the hatch. For a moment, nothing happened. The water continued to recede down the viewport as the pod made its way upward. Then, with a crack of protest, the servos managed to shove the hatch open against the outside pressure, and with a hissing rush, the river began to pour into the pod. Padme gasped as the icy system blasted across her side and legs, far colder than she expected. The water quickly collected around her feet, rising up her shins, numbing the skin beneath her loose trousers. The pod's slow climb wavered, then stopped. As the water level approached Padme's knees, the pod began to slowly sink again. She keyed the hatch, wondering fleetingly what would happen if the water had penetrated the electronics or incapacitated the motors. But the hatch obeyed the command, resealing itself and cutting off the inrush. Peering upward through the viewport, she watched the play of light on the surface of the water as the pod continued to sink, then finally settled at the level of neutral buoyancy. She checked her instruments. The readings were a little ambiguous, but it looked like the top of the pod was about 4 meters down. With luck, that would be deep enough to obscure her presence and let her float past the Separatists' search. In fact, with even luck, she might even be able to ride straight to the manufacturing plant itself. Most industrial processes required a plentiful water supply, and her river was heading in the general direction of Duja's coordinates. At any rate, until she was safely past the search area, there was nothing she could do. Shutting down everything she could, propping up her feet on a section of the control board to let them out of the water, she settled in for a long wait. She wasn't here for comfort. She was here to make sure Duja hadn't died in vain. And that's it. I thought this reading was good, but not as interesting as the last one we got. But it was very interesting to see the ship almost sink, then taking her down the river right to the manufacturing plant. But that's just my opinion. I want to know what yours is. Let me know in the comment section down below. So that wraps up today's video. If you like this video, please click the like button down below, and if you want to see more videos like these, please consider subscribing. And if you want to stay up to date of whenever I post a video, please make sure you hit the bell button right next to the subscribe button, and please share this video with your friends. And with that being said, I hope every one of you have a splendid rest of your day, and remember guys, the Force will be with you, always.